questions as they're going on through. So the idea of the talk that I'm going to give today is effectively going into the realities of what we do for a living, which is there's going to be stress. And stress is a very, not nebulous term, but it's a very general term. And obviously there's a lot of different types of stress, and we'll get into that. And then effectively how we can find a balance between the stressors of our life and our ability to recover from said stressors. So that way we're going to be effective with what we're doing with teaching, with service, with scholarship, and everything in between. So first thing that we're going to really get into is talking about the balance between stress and recovery. So when we think about athletes, and that's my world that I come from, which is exercise physiology, sports physiology, which is we want to apply enough stress in order to get better, but not so much stress that it's something that people can't recover from. And in academia, we have a term for that, and it's called burnout. In athletics, we call it overtraining. But the simple reality is we're applying more stress than the body can recover from. And we're going to find that everyone has we're going to talk about the inverted U relationship, which is there's going to be an optimal amount of stress that someone is going to thrive under. Some folks are high stress animals. Some folks are low stress animals. There's obviously some genetics. There's some realities of how we perceive stressors, which we'll get into. And then what are the stressors that just only stress you out? And what are the things that you're going to be able to accommodate for the stressors? It's going to help push you to improve your skills in one way, shape, or another. In theory, that's what our education is, which is we're constantly stretching the knowledge of our students, helping them not just learn, but learn how to apply the knowledge in our classroom to whatever profession they're obviously striving to get into once they graduate. And then, of course, obviously how we keep the balance. Now, I apologize. My slides are always kind of a hodgepodge, which is probably much like my mind. But when we look in the bottom left, what we have there is what's known as a hormetic stressor. Now, a hormetic stressor means a little bit of the stress probably doesn't do anything to it. A mild to moderate amount of the stress is going to cause positive changes, but then too much of the stress and it's going to literally do more damage to you than what your body can recover from. A great example of this, though not this time of year, is sun exposure. So some folks, based upon your skin melanin content and otherwise, can go outside on a sunny day and get a decent tan with only being out in the sun for about 5 minutes. Some folks are going to need half an hour or an hour of sun exposure in order to go ahead and darken their skin a bit more. But that individual in the first condition will have literally gotten a severe sunburn after half an hour out in the sun without sunscreen on. So we're looking to find what is the optimum amount of stress in those situations. What is the amount we're going to apply that we're going to get better from, but it's not going to beat ourselves down. And I understand that can be very difficult when it comes to the realities of being a professor, being an instructor, in order to, well, you still got to teach those classes, you still got to go to those meetings, you still have all of those responsibilities that you can't just shirk. So we're going to get into the other side, which is the recovery side of it. On the right side there, we're looking at situations where obviously it's how much stress we apply to the individual and then how long it's going to take them to fully recover from those stressors. And obviously when we apply too much stress, it's going to take a much greater amount of time in order for the body to recover from the demands that have been placed upon it. Now, when we go deeper into thinking about stress, and I understand that things might be a little too small on your screen that you can go ahead and read them, but effectively, we've got obviously the things that are going to be stressors on our body and the different ways that this stress is going to be applied. And then we're going to have the things we can do to enhance the recovery. I personally like the much simpler version, which is to either think of a bucket reference or to think about a balance, because it turns out life is stressful. Now, when we say professional stress, everyone can think of something immediately, okay? Now, is all professional stress going to be the same? Meaning, is having to go to a long meeting that's a little bit arduous the same as getting to teach a class that you obviously enjoy, to having to either stay late to teach night classes or come in early for some other thing. Which of those are going to be essentially a stronger stressor on yourself? From there, we've got the personal, which now we're talking about the realities of what's going on with your relationships, with your family, with your spouse, with your friends, with your community, and then the physical stress. And this is going to be not necessarily working out, but this can be obviously, unfortunately, things like injuries. Turns out I saw a student, let's just say, almost fall pretty hard on the ice out there, which would have been a solid stressor on their body, specifically their hip, if they would have gone down at the angle it looked like they were going to. So on the flip side is we have a recovery. And I'm going to give a pretty interesting anecdote about, in my mind, about the recovery side of it, which is really, we have the first really two big rocks, which is, are we getting enough sleep and or rest? What are we doing to recover, and are we actually actively recovering? So are we laying in bed, doom scrolling the news and staying up later and not getting as high quality of sleep because we're staring at a screen? Are we just not able to get that much sleep because of those family responsibilities and otherwise? And you can see how the two sides are going to affect each other. And then the other part is going to be our nutrition. Are we getting in enough food throughout the day? Are we getting in enough water and staying hydrated throughout the day? And one thing that's fascinating is some of the anecdotal research for individuals that are doing things like intermittent fasting is it's a much harder to essentially not, shall we say, lose it upon people when you're not eating very frequently, keeping yourself effectively fueled. I joke with my students in that every person is an athlete, irregardless if they think of themselves as an athlete, because we're all in this contact sport called life. And if anyone wants to disagree with me on the contact side of it, and you drive to work, you probably are going to see some contact on occasion when somebody runs into somebody else. Now, we want to think about however much stress we're applying, and we're being mindful of the stress. Now, it's not like you can tell your kids to quit talking to you when you're stressing when they're stressing you out. That's obviously not quality parenting. You can't just all of a sudden shirk all of your work responsibilities, and you should maintain a physical practice, and we'll talk about what that means, but maybe dial that back whenever we get to very stressful states so that we can have this balance on one side of the continuum to another. So to kind of pause and reflect, given what I've talked about just in this brief moment and then what you guys are able to read on the slide, what would you guys say is the number one stressor in your life? What's the number one stressor in your life?
Are you wanting us to answer?
Absolutely. I don't like talking to myself. It's
all right. I would say
weird.
Work.
What part of work?
Managing classes, managing expectations, staying one step ahead.
Of the students and the lectures and making sure that where you're at with the content. Absolutely.
Yes.
What else, folks?
Navigating promotion and tenure expectations and figuring out just what's wanted and how you're supposed to demonstrate that you do your job.
Oh, that's hard. And some departments have really clear rubrics where it's easy to see where you stand. Others, it's a bit more nebulous and you're not quite sure. You know, it's one of those things that you need to pass that threshold. But if you don't know where that threshold is, yes, that can obviously be daunting. And it's a fascinating reality if everyone here has had to do or gotten their teaching evaluations. And shall we say, if you just gave all of your students A's, you probably get a better teaching evaluation, but you know you're not delivering in the same quality of content if you don't maintain that rigor. So absolutely. What else, folks?
Okay, for me, I'm I'm in a visiting assistant position. And so just balancing the getting all my classes set up. I have a 4-4 load, new classes, and also balancing the accreditation stuff and the service component and all of the different things that I don't know are coming, and they suddenly are on the schedule. So just figuring that out.
Speaking of moving the goalposts. Yeah,
Yes.
no, it's just, these are the stressors that come at us. Now, what do you guys would say that are the things that you do the best with when it comes to your recovery side of it? You're really good at unwinding on the weekend and leaving work at work. You're really good at making sure that you get an appropriate, okay, I already see Camille saying nope to, I'm guessing everything, but that's okay. We've got the sleep side of it, really good at making sure that you eat breakfast and take care of yourselves. Or is this something that we probably need to work on?
Yeah, definitely needs work.
It's okay. That's okay. It's just, when we think about this paradigm, if a lot of us are obviously tilting to the right, and we're tilting to the right, that's the thing that's going to slowly push us into that situation where we're going to get burnt out. We're not going to be able to deliver as well in the classroom. We're not going to be as engaged with our students because it just turns out we're asking too much of our body. Because I've got my laptop on in front of me, and I've got obviously this on there so I can read my slide a bit better. Again, talking about my vision. That was a fun moment. So it's all stress, okay? The way that your body responds to stress is uniform. It's really good if you have to fight or run from a lion. So I'm sure all of you guys have taught or heard about the fight or flight response. That comes from a branch of our autonomic nervous system, called our sympathetic nervous system. Our body tells us that we need to get ready. We need to be able to give it some go and fight or flee, which unfortunately, and this is an issue that we're going to see with our students, specifically when it comes to things like test anxiety, you can't fight a test. Well, I mean, I guess you could, but it'd be really weird to see a student like punching a piece of paper or their keyboard, and they probably shouldn't run away from it. And so when we're thinking about these stressors being pushed through our body, like, yeah, it's kind of entertaining to think about a student, running from your exam. It's instead to think about our bodies just trying to get ourselves ready to overcome something that's meant to be more physical in nature, whereas what we do is obviously more mental in nature. So how many of you folks, when you first go into that classroom on a new prep, that first couple times that you're teaching, you are legitimately nervous. You are literally anxious. You can feel yourself ramped up, maybe the butterflies. It's very nervous or very normal to feel a little GI discomfort, maybe to feel like you need to immediately go to the bathroom. That's your sympathetic nervous system working for you. In fact, it gets better in hardcore, but it is in combat physiology situations, meaning legitimate combat, police situations. It's very normal and taught to police cadets and combat troops that you could wet yourself because of how stressed you are, how much adrenaline, epinephrine your body is dropping in your bloodstream. And once again, real good situation if you have to legitimately fight or legitimately flee. But instead, we're getting this response while we're having to send emails. We're getting this response when we're teaching our classes, when we're going to meetings. And so we need to be aware of the fact that our body's going to have this response. And this response for stress is going to be useful when we apply it to something. And when we apply it to something, this is physical movement. Now, that doesn't mean you need to go over to the campus rec center and lift heavy weights or go running on the track or anything. The key thing is you just need to move some. This could be you throw a 1 to 2 minute dance party to literally just dance the energy off. In fact, that's a quote from Burnout, which is a great book if any of you folks are interested in reading more about how to resolve those stressors. And we'll get to other things that you can do, but understanding that, you might feel your heart going a little bit faster in chest. That's adrenaline, that's normal, okay? But that in turn is also releasing other hormones known as cortisol, and I'm sure you're also very familiar with insulin when it comes to controlling blood sugar. Cortisol is your stress hormone. It's a double-edged sword. It's really good at helping us free up carbohydrate and free up fat to use it as energy when we're exercising. However, it's not so useful when, again, that stress is when we're sitting down at our computer working on some paper that's due the next day. It's not going to be resolved and being utilized in a good, productive manner if we're having this response when we're in a meeting or we happen to be having to teach a class. So when we feel this, we can think about trying to slow down our breathing. We can obviously, if we can step away for a moment, if we can walk around, move around, it's going to help resolve the signal, which is going to help us come back to that more rested state, which in turns out we're applying less stress to our body. We've got less that we're going to have to focus on recovering from. So when it comes to stressors, it's important that we keep in mind that not all stressors are the same. So when we think about the stress of work, we think about the stress of relationships, we think about all the other different types of ways we can apply stress that are physical. So let's start off with the physical side of it. In your life, is the greatest physical stressor the exercise that you're having, that you do? Is it perhaps some type of injury that you're having to recover from? Is it some illness? Or is it something in your environment that is the major stressor? So just to share a little bit from my life, which is when it comes to the environmental stress, my wife and I have new neighbors on either side of our house. And one of them has a giant Labradoodle that loves to bark at nothing all of the time. And then the other neighbor next door has a puppy that also loves to bark at nothing all of the time. It has obviously been great for my wife and I's sleep and relaxation with the joys of a dog barking super early in the morning or super late at night. Now, in your own life, what would you rank would effectively be the greatest physical stressor that you happen to be encountering?
One thing for me is that the driving the interstate from Lexington to Richmond, and I know I'm a grown-up and that probably sounds ridiculous, but I can feel it in my neck and shoulders, like just the commute, I think sometimes because I'm not walking or I'm not out in nature, and then sometimes people are driving crazy. It just sometimes kind of sets me off to show up to campus really frazzled.
Hey, no, that's very real. Your stress response to that situation is absolutely appropriate. It's what your body's doing. And it's one of those things that I like how you brought up, you come to campus frazzled. So like you're already starting your day off in a stressed state. And then of course, you'll probably open your email and see everyone else's to-do list for you and, you know, see a bunch of emergencies of other people, which are not your emergency, but it can be easy. You can see how it kind of dog piles. And we're getting into that straw on the camel back type situation. Thank you. What else would folks say are some physical stressors they're encountering?
I have a 4-month-old baby who's going through a sleep regression right now, which means I'm going through a sleep regression a bit. So that's a little difficult at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. So you think about nothing against your wonderful child, which is obviously they're taking from the sleep side of it. So you're losing on the recovery. And then, yes, the stressor of, yeah, the dog's barking next door is not the same as the child obviously singing the song of their people multiple times throughout the night and not allowing you to sleep. So you're aware of that. And obviously, once again, that's not a situation you can walk away from. So you have to be there and solve those problems. But keeping in mind, like, okay, if we're already starting our day off in a taxed state, if we're already starting off where we're in a certain amount of stress that's going on, what can we do, not necessarily to mitigate it, but what can we do with how we organize our day, prioritize our tasks, so that we're not going to go from being stressed to even more stressed to even more stressed. Maybe we go from being stressed to something that's a little bit more of a relaxing component of our work. So for me, and this is meant to be a joke, and I know I'm not always good at them, but one of the things I find to be relaxing is to grade student assignments, because I get to sit down and judge people. You know, it's like going to jury duty. You get paid to sit and judge people. It's kind of fun. Now, what would you guys say would be that part of your workday that is the least stressful? And hopefully you're not going to say leaving work and nothing else actually brings down the stress.
For me, it would be just having the moments to converse with my colleagues, just have some conversations about anything, really, but something with someone other than the computer. Well, not you all, but you know what I mean.
Yes, no, I get what you mean, having that interpersonal relationship, and that is something that is going to help de-stress. Good. What else, folks?
I agree with that. That resonates a lot with me, what Angela said. But to say something different, I find that when I'm in front of my students in the classroom, I'm not stressed. Now, the prep might be stressful, but when I'm in there and I'm interacting face to face, I feel like I'm having fun.
Great to hear, since teaching is job one. And I think a lot of us have that same type of relationship where it's like, if all I had to do was be in front of the kids, this job would be even better in a lot of different ways. But so obviously, well, I guess you could just try to program all your classes to be 8 a.m.s and 9 a.m.s, though I don't know how much the students would love it. But thinking about what are the things we can do that gives us that reprieve, gives us that relaxation, puts us in that more calm state. So then, yeah, we can maybe have those stressful emails to deal with, those stressful projects, those stressful meetings, and trying to be mindful of, okay, if we know our commute always has us frazzled, well, is it I'm commuting in and then I'm going straight to teach? So it's like I'm frazzled, but then I get to do something I like that helps me relax. Or do I try to commute in a little bit earlier, so that way I've got some downtime to maybe work on a project that I actually do enjoy working on before I have to do those stressful meetings, stressful activities, whatever I'm starting to feel happens to be stressful. Now, another component is, do we have anyone here that's worked as a sports official or has worked as worked in food service as a server, waiter, waitress?
Yeah, I've done the food service one for sure.
So in that context, the first time someone was just a real jerk to you, how stressed out did that make you?
It was intense. It was hard to even think, hard to talk.
Yeah, that's that fight or flight response. It's very normal. So now by the time you got to your 87th awful customer, did you have the same reaction as you did to that first one?
No, definitely not.
So that right there is what we're referring to as stress inoculation. Now, that doesn't mean that I want everybody to go through really stressful things all of the time, because it turns out that's really hard on the body. But to try to keep in mind is the more that we're exposed to those stressors, the more that we look at our teaching evaluations, the more we're able to do these things. It is going to get a bit easier, but it takes time. And it takes time, but giving yourself that grace of understanding, yeah, the first time that I do anything, I'm always going to be really stressed out. Same thing our students are experiencing whenever we give them a hands-on activity. We have them do some type of skills lab, or obviously give them a hard test. But the idea is we still want to understand that, yeah, it's always going to be stressful the first time you do it. And then after we do it more and more, it's going to get to be easier and easier. In fact, my line that I like to do with some of my students, and a great example of it is, since you've got a 4-month-old, you know, when your child's crying, especially in those first couple weeks or months, you know, that's the hungriest that child has ever been. That's the coldest it's ever been. That's the most tired it's ever been. And so go figure, it's going to cry about that situation. And by that being said, I don't want you guys to go outside when it's 1 degree weather in a t-shirt and shorts so you can really know what it's like to feel cold. But understanding the more that we're exposed to a stressor, typically the lower the response that stressor is going to give us. And over time, it's going to make a number of things a lot easier. Questions on this component? So I've obviously hit upon the basics of, yes, make sure we're sleeping, make sure that we're eating enough. But some other things that I want to bring up is the term is active rest, which is you're doing something that you find relaxing. For me, it's walking. I like to go hiking around my neighborhood. I like to walk around. It helps me clear my head. It helps me relax, and it helps me be better at what I'm doing for the rest of my day. Other folks, your active rest could be knitting. It could be puzzling. It could be crosswords. So when active rest comes to mind, when I throw that out there, who finds, or what does anyone find to be a really useful active rest for them?
Solitaire for me. On my phone, on my phone.
Now, OG solitaire, are we talking spider solitaire, or what are we doing?
I don't know. The lowest level. I want to win.
Hey, but that's good. You've got your form of active rest, something that you can do to help you unwind. And I mean, I don't know if the work laptops have solitaire, but I think you could probably look and find out. What else do we have for active rest that people enjoy doing?
I bake and do little crafts.
Ooh, what type of crafting do you like to do?
Oh, a lot. Little fiddly things like little origami, or bigger things like ceramics and weaving and everything in between.
Nice. Oh, that's great, guys. Key thing is to find that activity you like to do that helps you relax and unwind. And if that means, after a stressful meeting, you go back to your office and you fold yourself a couple cranes, then that's fine. That's something that's going to help you relax and help you recenter, and then be able to go and do the next part of your day and be in that moment and not bringing your stress into the classroom, bringing your stress into the next meeting that you're going to. Now, when it comes to relaxation, I think that's relatively straightforward for most of us. Compassionate touch is the best way that I can describe things when it comes to like just literal physical, like just getting to sit next to your partner, getting to go and get something like a massage. Obviously, we are all adults and one of us has a child and we know where children come from. The key thing is, whatever the compassionate touch is that we enjoy, communicating that with our partner, maybe trying to have that massage scheduled, once a week, once a month, something that's going to help us recover and relax from that stress. So does that make sense? I know we can talk about the 5 love languages, which has been shown to be debunked, but one of them is, physical touch, physical intimacy. And what do you find to be the thing that actually helps you relax? And on the right, we can see a bunch of different options that we can think about and doing. And I do want to highlight that the upper right one can be very cathartic and very useful. Now, that being said, to have a good cry, probably want to do that with your office door closed, because it's probably going to, make things a little bit easier. But if that's something that just really, I mean, come on, who hasn't been so wound up, so upset and otherwise that it was just after you got that cry out of your system, you're good. It's the equivalent of our students that might have, I'll use the exercise analogy, worked out so hard that they had to throw up, but then after they throw up, they felt better. Okay, it's just one of those things that helps us resolve that stress. It just turns out, due to social expectations, crying in public is slightly frowned upon. Though, since this is being recorded, I'm not going to tell you a funny crying story. But if you guys see me walking around campus, you bring it up and I'll be more than happy to tell you what I think is a pretty funny story. And it involves me. I was the one who was crying. Now, here's that anecdote I was alluding to earlier, which is the Bulgarian weightlifting team. Now, Bulgaria is not a big country. The population of Bulgaria is a fraction of, it's not even the size of New York City, but In 1988, Bulgaria won more medals in Olympic lifting than China did, and nearly won as many Olympic lifting medals as Russia. Now, the US didn't win any because the US doesn't allow their athletes to use steroids. But the key thing is that side of the world, real easy to get past drug testing. So it turns out a lot of those athletes run a lot of stuff. So the key thing is, why was the Bulgarian team so much better than the Russians and the Chinese? Because the Russians had such a bigger population to pull from. So the key thing is, if you think you're going to find a person that can be a great Olympic lifter is a 1 in a million shot, Bulgaria only had 8 possible athletes. Russia and China, well, China, you're talking about over 1,000 potential athletes. So this was how the Bulgarians trained, which is every day they'd go into the gym, they'd work up to the heaviest squat they could handle, the heaviest snatch, which is when you take the bar all the way to overhead, and that's what Antonio Khrushchev is doing in the bottom right there. The clean and jerk, where you jump the bar to your shoulders and then jump it overhead. They'd max out on both of those movements and then come back in the afternoon and do the same thing again. If instead of a back squat, they would do a front squat. Excuse me. They did that workout 6 days a week, maxing out on 3 different movements in the morning, maxing out on 3 different movements in the afternoon. And then on Sunday, they only maxed out in the morning. They did do an afternoon session. If we were to do this with a college student otherwise, like I couldn't ethically do this research with a human being because of it's just too much stress. Now, here's how the Bulgarian weightlifting team was required to live. Every night, they were required to sleep 10 hours. Every meal was provided for them. People took care of all of their laundry. They were required to get 1 massage a day. They were required to take a nap in the middle of the day. Obviously, they got their lunch, they got their dinner. Their families were required to never stress them out. So no family stuff or otherwise, oh, it gets better. And if they wanted a significant other, they were given a significant other that would not stress them out. Now, by no means am I saying that everything there was great, but how much stress could you deal with if literally you got 10 hours of sleep every night, you had every meal provided for you, and it was obviously actively trying to optimize your health, you had a massage, a masseuse, and you didn't have to even do things like laundry, you didn't have to worry about any type of extra family stress. So yeah, they had a huge amount of stress they were applying to their body, but they had a massive amount of recovery, and go figure, those athletes were able to go to a level even with that smaller population compared to the rest of the world. And since a number of their methods has been duplicated in other places when it comes to giving those athletes every single thing they can to really remove all the other obstacles in their lives, so the only thing they have to do is adapt to the training. Does that make sense to you guys? And or now maybe makes you guys a little bit jealous. Now, how many of you folks are familiar with what's known as the inverted U relationship to stress? Okay, I got a couple nods and a couple not so much. That's all right. So effectively what we're going to find is, it's called the Yerkes-Dodson relationship, which is we're going to find that people in a given performance are going to perform optimally at an appropriate amount of stress to that individual, okay? If we apply too much stress, then we start to fall apart. We're not going to do as well. If we don't apply as enough stress, we're also going to have a lackluster performance. So if we were to think about from athletics, this is the equivalent of, it's easy for a kid to shoot free throws when they're by themselves in the gym. But when you put them in the championship game at the end of the quarter, and now this is the free throw to tie the game up or to win the game, they are in an incredibly high stress component, and that's when we see skills dissipate. But this is to the individual. So how many of you folks, think back to that stress inoculation, the first couple times that you tried to teach new material, you were sitting over here. You just know you were not doing as great of a job because you literally it was too stressful. Having that many students looking at you for the first time, being on a new university, not being comfortable yet with being in front of the students and knowing if you're really doing a good job. And then on the flip side, how many of you guys know that it just turns out, yes, you just rolled out of bed, you didn't take the time to wake up and get yourself prepared, and you were too under stressed, under aroused is actually the term that they're going to use in order to perform on your best level. So notice, guys, it's to the skill you're doing. So how many of you guys know you need to calm yourself down? You need to try to move yourself from this higher stress state to this lower stress state in certain things in your life. It could be dealing with relationships. It could be dealing with coworkers. It could be dealing with different tasks of, the requirements of your job. What comes to mind are things that you're easy to get too far to the right, to where you're just coming into the situation too stressed, and because of that, you're underperforming.
I was gonna comment, and then I realized I don't think I'm underperforming, because you added that at the very last part there. But one thing, I'm running a research study right now, and I'm been working on some stuff with Angela. So but this year I'm doing a sewing study, and I have to rely on participants showing up, students showing up, and that everything has to be aligned so that we have success. And it's all out of my control. I'm totally vulnerable. But I want to believe I'm still effective. It's just, I'm saying the impact on my body beforehand. I don't sleep. I'm concerned, even bordering agitation probably.
So, now we talk about stressors, and you've already pointing out the whole, and we can kind of go serenity prayer of, these are the things that I control. These are the things that I can't control. And making sure that you're not beating yourself up for, yes, you could do your due diligence, send the reminder email, send the text messages, try to really make it, but then it's like, I've done my part, and then it's time to just kind of, you got to unfortunately let it go.
Right.
And it's one of those things that it's easy to say, but it's one of those things that it requires consistent application, that you then are going to get to be a bit more comfortable with what's going on, because it's easy to stress out. And who's the faculty that's currently in the tenure hunt? I can only see the person that's talking most recently on the screen.
Maria was, but she left. Angela also said that too.
Okay. So in both those situations where it can be easy to be like, oh my God, am I doing enough? Am I doing a good job? You get the one teaching evaluation that the student, as I like to say, if you were on fire, they would put you out with gasoline. And you're like, oh my God, am I not going to get tenure because like this teacher or this student says I'm the worst teacher ever? It can be easy to catastrophize, to get into situations where it's like, okay, things have gone, I'm not feeling too good. So we need to keep in mind with this inverted U, where do you work the best? And so, a thing for myself is, if you told me I have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go sit in a meeting on meetings, I am going to have the hardest damn time getting my head off that pillow. Like, that's just, you might as well just put a magnet on there and one on my head, and it's just going to be stuck. Meanwhile, literally this week, we've been up at that time so we can go help out with ROTC's cadet testing, that we're doing some stuff trying to help them out on helping make those students in better shape and making sure they're safe as they go through their training. And so don't get me wrong, it's still 4 o'clock in the freaking morning. I'm not excited to be awake at that time, but I'm excited to go get to campus and work with those kids. And so to me, that allows me to get into more of that optimal performance level where it's easy for me to do what I want to do. So another thing we need to keep in mind, folks, when it comes to that optimal level of arousal, that optimal level of stress, is how long are we going to be in that stress state? Is this a situation where it's like, okay, we just have to give that speech, Or is this the day that we have to literally lecture for 6 hours in front of the students and we just start to feel drained, like it's just taking a lot out of us? So what's the appropriate amount of arousal, of intensity that you can bring that's sustainable throughout the entire day, and it doesn't have you at the end of the day where you just want to stare at a wall and do nothing for half an hour? And so the reference that I like to do is, if we're having an athlete do something like a wall sit, or we're having them just walk around at a constant pace, they're actually going to be burning about the same amount of calories. But walking around is a whole lot more comfortable than doing something like a wall sit. And the reason for it is the wall sit, you never get a break. When you're walking, you only have one leg supporting you effectively at a time. You never have to just hold and not let go. So, what's that thing where you can cycle that stress so you're not constantly inundated with it? But what are the other things that you have to be knuckled down the entire time? And then let's be honest, when it comes to the academic calendar, of understanding there's going to be parts of that year that we are going to be applying way more stress than we want to. We are currently in week 2 of the semester. I'm impressed that anybody would come to listen to someone as boring as me. But, the reality is that first week or 2 is relatively stressful for us. When advising starts until that ends, that's another part where we know things are about to get more stressful. And then, of course, as we're getting to the end of the semester, we've got to get those grades in by that Monday. And I know I've had a Thursday night final in the past, so it's like, have fun with that weekend of grading. But it's one of those situations, we know it's coming at least. That we can predict. You can't predict if your 4-month-old is going to have a sleep regression. I'm sorry that you're going through that. But we can at least keep in mind what parts of our life and our schedule are going to be things where it's like, okay, I know this week's going to be rough. So this week's going to be rough, or these days of this week are going to be rough. So I'm going to make up a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner ahead of time. So I don't have to think about food that day. I can just roll out of bed, take it with me, and I've got something to go. I'm going to make sure that I schedule some quality origami time. I'm going to make sure that I schedule myself a massage the day after. I'm going to do those things to be aware of. At certain points in our life, stress is going to be much higher. Hopefully your guys' holiday break was a good de-stress. You actually had a time to relax a little bit. The same thing when it comes to the summer. Maybe, our contracts for a lot of folks were on a 10-month. There is no expectations of having to work over the summer, but if you're able to do a little bit of those course preps, and only for a couple hours per week, that's going to save you that much time during the actual semester. So you're not going to feel like all I do is run from doing course prep to teach to going to trying to get my research going to going on to meetings. So you can have a little bit more breathing room in that. I like to think of it as, each class, you've got this many hours that you're going to have to put into them. So if I can put this many hours in that break, then I don't have to worry about the rest of those hours when it comes time for the semester. So keeping in mind where we're at with those stressors, and are we applying them in a way that happens to be sustainable? Now, when it comes to whether or not something that's just stressing us out or something that's helping us get better, a lot of it can come down to mindset and individual interpretation of it. How many of you guys know that person that if a car even gets close to them on the freeway, they're going into full-blown road rage, and it is really uncomfortable to be riding in a car next to them? Okay, well, I like how Camille's like, no, but I see somebody going like, yeah, like I know that person. As long as that person's not you, no. But you've got other folks that nearly get cut off or sideswiped or everything, and they don't even bother hitting the horn. They're like, oh, whatever, water off a duck's back. And so that's one of those situations where I tell my students, when it comes to human physiology, your body's goal is just to get you through today. It's not really thinking about, okay, like, well, if I do this with bad technique, how's my knee going to feel in 10 years? If I'm not getting enough sleep, well, what's that going to do to my brain health and heart health 20 years down the road? It's just trying to get us through today. And the other thing is our body's not there to make us happy, it's just to keep us alive, which, you know, explains things like anxiety, like depression. It's there to keep us going. It's not there to necessarily make sure we're having a good time. So it's important that we still think about trying to frame these challenges we're going to come into. And with the understanding that the more frequently we have these stressors applied to us, but giving ourselves enough time to recover from them, the better we're going to do with it. So making sure that we're breaking up that stress, we are recovering, but we're going to be giving ourselves the opportunity to be a little bit less stressed from it each time we do it. And so when we think about when stress is applied, what we have on the bottom right is essentially the origination of the stress response model from Hans Selye. Hans Selye is an interesting, he was a physiologist, and effectively he was looking at the effects of estrogen and could it cause tumors in rats. And he had 3 groups. One was the group that he was injecting with estrogen. The other was a group that he was injecting with saline, so just salt water. And then the third group that he just left alone. And at the end of his study, he found that the rats that were injected with estrogen had more cancerous tumors, or had cancerous tumors. But then the rats that he was injecting with saline also had tumors, but the control group didn't have any. Now, salt water is not something that's going to kill you. And it wasn't even like salt water as in like going out to the oceans. It was just saline. It's what they give people in IV drips. That does not cause cancer. There's nothing in there. And what he found is, after really thinking about it, now imagine every day you are stuck in a small box. A giant comes in with a giant hand, picks you up, and then stabs you with the giant needle and injects you with fluid. Probably going to be a little stressful. And then when that stress occurs, turns out our body is now going to try and resist that stress. Okay? It's going to go ahead, and that's what we're talking about, releasing that epinephrine, releasing that cortisol in order so that we're going to be physically able to do this. But if we keep applying the stress for too long, instead of getting adaptation, where we come back, now we get into exhaustion, where literally our body is not able to recover fully from those stressors. So we're just going to feel beat down. So the other thing to keep in mind is obviously not all stressors are the same. For some of us, you know, obviously driving, you know, dealing with traffic can be legitimately stressful. Other folks are only going to find it mildly stressful. But we still know what tends to stress us out. And if we know what stresses us out, we can maybe try to structure our day and otherwise so that we're not doing those high stress things all the time. In fact, I hope you guys are enjoying this presentation. I am. And I'll tell you what I'm planning on doing after this is the thing that stresses me out, which is I'm going to go fight the blank page and work on writing up some research. And that is going to stress me out. But then I get to teach at 11, and I'm looking forward to that lecture because we're getting to do a hands-on lab today in the class, which is something that I enjoy doing, of thinking about like, okay, I'm going to go into things that are pretty stressful and then go to things that are more of a positive stress. Now, the last one is the realities of the toxic stress. So this is one of those situations that there is no, it doesn't get better. It's just something that's going to keep dragging you down. And of course, you know, obviously, if that's teaching, you should probably find a different profession. But if that's certain aspects of your job, of a relationship or otherwise, I like to use the term with my students of addition through subtraction. So what we're doing is giving ourselves less stress in our life by not doing that anymore. When I say remove a toxic person from your life, who comes to your mind immediately? Hopefully it's not an in-law because they're really hard to get rid of. Well, I guess you could, but you know, issues, you know, hopefully it's not, it's your spouse. You definitely got to rethink your life. But I'm sure you've had that one friendship looking back where it's like, that was toxic. Like that person was not a good thing in my life. And so trying to make sure that you're at least on occasion thinking about like, okay, you know, who's that coworker that is always having the worst day ever? And every single time I walk into the room with them, they just Eeyore and bring down the party. How many people do I encounter that it's just like, no, this person just stresses me out. And how can I minimize my interactions with them? And, how do I set those good boundaries with those people? Understanding like, yep, whenever you keep going. Whenever I was doing my PhD, we had one of those individuals that I would have to work with when I was doing my research. I would set a timer because some of the stuff that we were doing in the lab was actually very like, you had to have it in this stage for this many minutes and then get it off. I would always set the timer when I went to talk to them at something like 1 to 4 minutes, because this person would hold me captive with the conversation for half an hour if I wasn't careful. But then the timer would go off, like, oh, sorry, gotta go. And they're, oh, okay, get back to the research. I got you, thanks, appreciate your time. And it allowed me to navigate that relationship a bit better. Now, I don't know if the egg timer thing is gonna work, but when in doubt, what can you do to set those boundaries to give yourself the chance to recover well? So the big takeaway I want you guys to think about from this is, what can we do to keep that balance? We know we've got those stressors in our life, and then we've got stressors that we're not choosing. I was on a work trip in October, and my wife gives me a call that our transmission in her car grenaded. It's gone, and it was a super expensive repair. It's like, oh, I was not expecting to have to buy a new to us used car, but this is life. Our cat, who is doing well now, but he literally almost died of congestive heart failure back in November. We had him in an emergency overnight vet visit, and now we have to medicate him twice a day, in the morning and the evening. And giving cats medications, if you guys ever need help with it, I'll talk you through it, but I don't want to help because it's really hard and it's not fun. But it's one of those things that those extra stresses hit. So my wife and I make sure that we're both navigating those stresses as well as we can by communicating the needs, everything else we need to. And yeah, maybe making sure that we're putting a little bit less stress on ourselves in different areas, so that way we're not getting ourselves off kilter. Because obviously it's easy to do too much. It's easy to, okay, maybe instead of sleeping 8 hours tonight, I'm only going to sleep 5, so that way I got 3 more hours to work tomorrow. But it's actually throwing that balance off, which is going to hurt you in the long run. So making sure, like, what are the things that we need to work on in order to help ourselves deal with the known stressors, but then have a bit of flexibility when those life comes at you real fast moments happen. So when I say this out loud, and I know we've talked through a lot of things and I've kind of moved fast in a lot of different topics, what do you guys find is the area, or what comes to mind is the area that you guys probably need to work on for that balance? Like, what's that extra thing in trying to work on the recovery or dealing, or just the stressors and the way that they're applied to you, that you think is going to help you professionally?
I mean, I like that you added like that option with because I also love doing crafts and I sew a lot. And I love to go to the pool and swim, but I love that you said like folding 2 cranes, because for me, finding those moments of balance, a lot of my hobbies take such a large amount of time that I don't do them at all. Like going to the pool is quite a big event, but I have time to sit and fold a couple cranes. So that for me, that is something that I'm thinking about, like being able to put those moments in that are smaller throughout the day to break up the stress.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. All right. So a lot of different things that you can think about in your own life that's going to potentially help. Now, one thing I do also want to make sure that I touch upon, which is when we think about stress side of it, and this is something that I tell my students about because they often forget, drug use is stressful. And this is referring to not just things like alcohol, but it turns out things like caffeine. It is a bit of a stressor on the body. It's something that does help us with alertness, but it's one of those things that can then eat into that sleep quality, sleep quantity on the other side. We can think about, yes, with exercise, it doesn't have to be you go to the gym. Your exercise could be you go for a walk with your pet. Well, walking cats is really hard. I'd stick with the dog. Could be, you know, going out and playing with your kids. Could be just going and doing some jumping jacks or that aforementioned 1 minute dance party with yourself. Whatever is going to be something you can do consistently, but it's going to help you burn off a bit of that stress, have a place for all of that extra energy to go for a bit. And then knowing what's going to be that type of quality relaxation for you. I do know of a faculty member who will remain nameless since this is being recorded that literally has a picture of their boss taped to a punching bag in their basement that they go and throw some rounds down on a frequent basis. Now, just so we're clear, I don't have a basement in my house. So I'm not talking about myself. Okay. But it is one of those situations that they find that to be that catharsis, you know, and you need to find what works for you and making sure that like, okay, these are things we need to work upon. I actually had a conversation with another friend that has a bit of what we colloquially refer to as a monster-in-law. And so how does he set really good boundaries with his mother-in-law? And so that she's not going to be stressing him out every single time they see each other, which is very frequent because, you know, he and his wife are getting to that stage in life where they're having kids and the grandparents are obviously going to be around a lot more. What are the things in your work environment, your home environment that you're going to be able to help deal with, or it's going to make that a little bit less stressful? Now, I know we all have to deal with the joys of the heating and air conditioning situations here on campus, where sometimes being in your building can be a stressor because you're sitting or you're sweating while sitting still, or you're shivering while sitting still. So, you know, do we leave an extra sweatshirt and a blanket in our office that we can put on? I know of coworkers that have literally brought in space heaters to make things a bit more comfortable so that literally being at work is not as stressful. One of my coworkers uses a white noise machine that's constantly playing in the background in order to help them, you know, not have to think about all the different sounds coming throughout the rooms, you know, with students walking around talking, which is a good thing. We want the kids to be social with one another, but we also want to make sure that we're keeping in mind, okay, what are the things that build us up and not tear us down, and what's going to make all of this work a lot more sustainable for us to do over the long haul. And when it comes to this balance, like anything else, it's finding what works for us. What's stressful for me is not always going to be what's stressful for you. And thinking about, okay, I know how I respond to this. How do I set this in my day? So that way I'm effectively not asking too much of myself, and I'm not constantly feeling stressed out. I'm not constantly feeling wound up, because you're simply not going to be as good at your job if you're constantly stressed out. So I have gone over, which is something that I am chronically bad at when it comes to teaching and otherwise. I really appreciate you guys coming today and listening to this talk. Do you guys have any questions for me over anything we talked about today? Otherwise, have a great one. And like I said, if you guys see me walking around campus, you guys please feel free to stop me and I will tell you that funny story about using crying as a catharsis.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys. You guys have a great one, and yeah, appreciate your
Yes.
time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good one.